Okay, folks, thanks for joining us today for our candidate forum for House District 39. With me is Corey Rosenlee, the Democratic candidate for this seat, and next to him is Rep. Elijah Pierick, the incumbent representing House District 39. Now, before we start, just wanted to go over a little bit of housekeeping. We do have some poo-poos in the back, some water. Grab those if you're feeling hungry or thirsty. We are taking audience questions today, so if you want to ask the candidates a question, don't shout it out. This is being recorded, and the recording's not going to pick you up. But instead, there's some postcards over there. You can write your question down and hand them to one of our employees in the Civil Beat shirts. They'll come around, pick those up, and they'll get the questions to me so I can ask the candidates. But yeah, we're just going to dive right into it. And this first question is for both of you. You know, this is a pretty diverse district. You got Hoopili, you got Westlock, you got parts of Waipahu and Kunia. And we're pretty deep into the election season. As you've been going door to door, what are some of the things you've been hearing from, the residents and your constituents? I'll start with Rep. Pierick.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Blaze, for having me. Aloha, Joel, for being here. Thank you. I'm going to hold it the whole time? Okay. Good to see you, Blake. Good to see you, Mom. So happy that you guys are here. Aloha, I'm guessing Mrs. Rosenlee and Mr. Rosenlee. So what have I been hearing and going door to door in my district? First off would be the economy. So the cost of groceries, the cost of electricity, the cost of gas, the cost of rent, etc. And then there's the crime. So those are the top two issues facing our district. Many other issues, including traffic, homelessness, and things like that.
And Corey?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much, Civil Beat, for having this. It's great in this day and age that we can actually have a civil discord about the issues facing our community. So I really appreciate that the Civil Beat is doing this. So one of the amazing things I've had is the opportunity is to go around our neighborhood and talk to thousands of people about issues that are concerning our community. And what amazes me is the diverse amount of issues that our community brings to me, that our neighbors share. You know, I remember in my community talking to a father whose two grown children can't afford to live in Hawaii. I remember talking to one of our kupuna, and she's living on a fixed income and just how hard it is to afford the cost of living. I remember talking to the mental health nurse working at the homeless mental facility, and just talking about how they're just underfunded all the time. So I appreciate the diverse views that I've heard, but if you ask the number one issue that I've heard in my neighborhood, it's easy by far, it's fireworks. And I can understand why. I mean, I've been in bed at 2 a.m. in the morning, and it's not like little sparklers that go off. There's explosions that go off that wake you up. And so I've heard from dog owners, I've heard from veterans with PTSD, and their big complaint is they want this public nuisance to stop.
This is a diverse district, a bunch of different neighborhoods. Have you folks seen differences between those communities? Like, what's most important for people in Westlock versus Hoopili versus Waipahu?
Do you prefer to debate who goes first in the questions?
I don't care.
Okay.
You can go first.
You know, I think with every community you have diversity within that community. You know, you talk to parents that are just trying to make sure that their kids have a good education. You know, we have senior citizens in our community who are retired. They just, again, are worried about their cost of living and trying to make it. So I think that when you look at, it's not necessarily that the problems are one by community, but you hear the diversity. Now, saying that, if I go to Waipahu, I'm going to hear a lot more about the homeless situation. You know, this is something that's right in their backyards, the amount of homeless that they have. Hoopili, we tend to have skews a little bit younger, and you have more families that are just working day to day. And when I go to Royal Kunia or to Village Park, we have a little bit of an older group there as well. So I do tend to hear different concerns when I go from communities. But the amazing thing is how you hear sometimes the same problems within the same communities, different communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there is different input from different neighborhoods, but generally, overall, the input is crime, the cost of living, condo insurance prices, homelessness, traffic, and things like that. issues specific to neighborhoods would be in Hoopili, they didn't want power lines to be placed over certain streets. Issues specific to Village Park more so is crime and fireworks. Royal Kunia also crime and traffic, West Lock traffic. And so the issues are rather generalized amongst all 30,000 constituents, but certain neighborhoods do have different focuses.
I do want to ask about fireworks. Corey, you're saying that's one of the biggest issues you're hearing from residents. How exactly do you propose to deal with that? The legislature, it's been a problem for a long time. There's been a number of recommendations that the legislature hasn't taken up. What can you do?
So right now, I'm on the Evan Neighborhood Board, and I actually asked our police representative to give us the data on whether, since the legislature passed the fireworks task force, whether the numbers have gone down. And I specifically wanted to see not just going down, because we know in our community that depending on the month, the closer you get to New Year's especially, that fireworks go up. But I want to see month by month over time whether numbers have gone down. And we actually have seen, since the task force started trying to decrease the amount of fireworks coming into the state, that it has gone down. Now, what can we do about it? I think one of the important things as a legislature is that we have to look not just in the now, but also into the future. There's new technology being used for all reasons to look at terrorism and bombs that they've been using to scan shipments coming into our country. And believe it or not, using gamma waves and artificial intelligence, they're able to identify explosives. So one of the things I'd like to have our task force look at is what is the most successful scanning strategy so we can stop fireworks from even getting into our state to begin with.
Yes, so the question is, what are we going to do about fireworks? In 2023, I introduced a bill to change the penalty from $5,000 to $10,000 to those who use illegal fireworks. And that's for days other than the 4th of July and New Year's Eve. I also, in that bill, had an aspect where x-rays would be required for all shipping containers coming into our harbors to scan for those fireworks so that we could stop them at the ports and not have to worry about them in the neighborhoods.
And then similarly for you, Rep. Pierick, you mentioned that public safety is top of mind for residents here that you spoke to. Obviously, that's a big concern with some of the violent cases happening on the west side, and this is the same police district. What would you propose next session that could help, alleviate those problems for your constituents?
Great question. So right now with crime being high, it's not as much a state legislator issue as it is a prosecutor's issue, judicial issue, and HPD issues. So we are understaffed when it comes to HPD officers. So in almost every mailer that I've sent out, I've asked people to join the police force, refer a friend to join HPD, because we need more police officers in order to combat these crimes happening in our communities. Also, we need to have a culture of pro-police in our legislature. Many of my colleagues are rather less pro-police. I'm very pro-police. I keep voting yes on all funding of the police bills. So we also need to have a good prosecutor at the county level who's prosecuting hard on all of these infractions. Sadly, we get cases that are documented by the police. They get a court date, but once the prosecutors start to prosecute, they're weak or lenient on it, and they don't get prosecuted hard, and the judges don't get a hard verdict. So we need to be tough on crime in the judicial branch, not just in the laws we make.
What's a specific proposal you'd put forward to do that?
It's not really a proposal. It's more people joining HPD, and it's the citizens of Hawaii electing a hard-on-crime prosecutor who's prosecuting harder, and then the judges who get appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate giving, hard verdicts on these crimes.
This next question is an audience question relating to education.
Please, can I answer the question?
Oh, sure.
It's all right.
Sorry.
Okay. So when I was 13 years old, my father started a program called Adult Friends for Youth. And they work with troubled youth. A lot of these kids had gotten in trouble with the law. Many had gone to jail. And in my house, I grew up with a program trying to help our kids so they never went to jail at all. And what I saw is that what it costs for $5,000 for a social worker could take 90% of these kids and actually make them very productive members of our society. So if we want to stop crime, oftentimes, by the time you're actually sentencing someone or police are getting involved is after the crime occurred. So research is very clear on this one. If you can lower poverty, you decrease crimes. If you help with substance abuse, you decrease crimes. If you deal with mental health, you decrease crimes. And if we can get the kids early enough and provide the support that they need, then you can turn kids that potentially could have had a life of crime into members of society that are contributing, paying their taxes, and hopefully having their own kids and families and producing in our society.
Okay, this is our first audience question, and it relates to education for both candidates. Would you consider a bill that would allow citizens to choose where their tax dollars can be put towards their school of choice, including homeschooling? I think what they're talking about is something similar to a voucher system. I'll stick with you, Corey, since you were a teacher for a long time, and then move through at Pierick.
So let's separate that question. You already have a choice in Hawaii. You can go to homeschooling if you want to. You can go to a charter school. You can go to a public school. And if you want to opt out, you can pay for a private school. So there is choice. But let's talk about the voucher system, because there's a big misconception about a voucher system. So right now, on average, let's just say we spend $12,000 per pupil to go to public school. And what if we just said, okay, parents, you can take your $12,000 and you can spend it to private school? Well, first of all, that $12,000 is an average. We have students within our school system, our special needs children. They can cost $100,000 per year. You have kids that come from poor families that need a free and reduced lunch, more programs. Those can be more expensive. We have athletic programs and all these other things that the public school system has to pay for. So at the end of the day, when you actually look at the cost per student, it's a lot less. And so in states where they've actually had a voucher system and you can just go anywhere, it wrecks the public education system. Because if half the kids go to a private school and you have a small school, you still need to have a third grade. But now you don't have a third grade teacher. One of the things we can do as a public system is come together to try to educate our keiki. And what a voucher system can do oftentimes is taking parents that already have the means to send their child to a private school and subsidize them. And it only leaves inside our public school system the poorest of the students that have the highest social needs, but now we have even less funding to do this one. What I want to make sure is that we fund our public schools properly and well, and make sure that all of our children get a great public education.
So thank you for the question. The question is, should we have a voucher system or school choice in Hawaii? I say absolutely. In 2023, I introduced a bill to have school choice in Hawaii. I'd like to give a shout out to my mom, Sherry Pierick. She homeschooled me my entire life, and thank you so much for that. Homeschooling works, private school works, public school works. And I think we should add fuel to the parents to choose the choices that they prefer on how to raise their kids. And so if everybody is getting taxed through state income tax, and that money's going to the state budget, and that comes out to be over $10,000 per child in our public school system, where is that money going? Well, it's automatically going to the public school system, even if a parent chooses to private school or homeschool their kids. So I think the money should follow the child. If the child is being homeschooled, let the parents raise their kids the way they prefer with that over $10,000, and the same with public school and private school.
Sticking with the topic of education, Hawaii is the only state that has a centralized DOE. Would you support a decentralized Department of Education? Why or why not?
Absolutely, I would. I introduced, I should say, co-signed a bill in 2024 to do that, and we are the only state in the nation that has one board of education for the entire state. All the other states have multiple boards of education for their local districts. And when we have localized governance, we have localized policies that are personalized to the students that are being educated. When we have a big system, we have big policies that might not meet all the needs of every student.
So the biggest problem we have with education funding is, one, our schools are not well funded to begin with. But the biggest problem we have on the mainland is we have school districts that are funded by property tax. So what happens is that you have districts that where the rich districts get twice as much as the poor districts. And you have great inequality in our school system. I don't want to give up on any of our kids. I believe in funding all of them. So by having a statewide system, we have equality. Whether you live in Kahala or you live in Waianae, the school systems get the same amount of money. The biggest problem is not whether we have a statewide system. Many countries around the world have a countrywide system to make sure that we have equity of funding. But what we do is, in Hawaii, is for too long, we do not fund our schools well. And that leads to what we have right now sometimes is we have a teacher shortage. We have large class sizes. So instead of trying to break up our schools and create more inequality, what I want is equality and to fund our schools well.
The DOE is already one of the biggest consumers of the state budget. Are you saying that it should be more, it should be spent more wisely? Could you explain a little bit more?
So actually it's not, because when you look at the state funding, it is a big chunk of the state funding. But the problem is that if you compare it to other school systems, on the mainland, most school systems are done by county and state. So they get nearly 50% of their funding from the counties. In Hawaii, our counties pay virtually nothing for our public schools. And so when you look at it, the overall budget as a percentage of overall taxation in Hawaii, our schools are grossly underfunded.
I'd like to add to that.
Sure.
So please correct me if I'm wrong. All the viewers fact check this online. But I believe our state budget is over $17 billion. And one of the biggest line items is our Department of Education. And when we are ranked for all other 50 states, I think we're around like 39 or something like that when it comes to student outcomes or student expenses. To use the argument that our teachers are underpaid, yes, our teachers are underpaid, and we need to have more pay towards teachers. But also, let's look at where the expenses are going. Hawaii has one of the largest administrative staffs of any Department of Education in the union. That means we have a lot of admin people being paid. Why not we pay the teachers? How about the Board of Education superintendent? He gets paid over, I think, $200,000 a year, and they just passed a bill in the legislature, of which I voted no, to uncap his salary. In other words, the Board of Education could choose what his salary is, maybe $300,000, maybe $400,000. We have so much money in the DOE. Let's stop paying the big bosses. Let's start paying the teachers.
Okay, let me respond to that if I could. So Elijah, let me ask you a question. You said to be fact checked, so let's fact check. Per capita, how does Hawaii rank when it comes to state administrative costs compared to other states?
I'll let the HSTA president answer that.
Last in the nation. We spend the least per capita on statewide administration compared to any other state. So when people give that myth that if we just get rid of a few administrators, we're already last in the nation. And that's one of the benefits of having a statewide system is you can group costs together. And so you cannot fire 2 administrators and pay for 14,000 teacher salaries. And it doesn't work that way. So when you need to pay teachers better, it's a significant cost of our state budget. Over $1 billion, getting close to 1.5, is for teacher salaries. But when you look at per capita, the reason why is that, yes, when you look for cost of living, when it comes to teacher salaries, we rank toward the last in the nation. And so that means that we have 1,000 teacher shortage, which means that in certain areas, students go years without having a qualified teacher. So one of the things I propose and that I want the legislature to fix is to pay teachers based on years of experience. Not only will this help us when we have mainland teachers coming in, but we have teachers that teach for 20 years and their salary can be frozen year after year.
Rep. Pierick, do you want to respond briefly if you want to?
Appreciate the info. Kelupu'u Elementary School has 3 vice principals. That sounds like a lot of admin staff to me.
Okay, we need to move on. This next few questions has to do with civic discourse and civil discourse. This first question is for you, Rep. Pierick. At the legislature, you've often stirred the pot. In particular, some would say that comments you've made on the House floor are controversial. Do you think you're being effective when you speak out like that?
I am grateful for the opportunity to represent 30,000 constituents across Ewa Beach and Waipahu, and they've asked me to do a good job. They've asked me to represent their voices in the legislature, and we need people to be making their voices heard in the legislature, whether it's the chamber floor, the committee meetings, or in the community. So absolutely, I'm very pleased to represent them with my voice.
Do you think your voice is representing a majority of the people in your district?
In 2022, the election results said so, so yes.
Corey.
Can I respond?
Well, I had a different question for you. So, Corey, you've also gone against the grain. Before you were HSTA president, you irked the union by organizing a work-to-rule protest among teachers where teachers did no more work than contractually required to do so. In your case, did you think rocking the boat was effective?
I think you need to have that voice. I'll say that, one of the things I fought hard for is to air condition Hawaii schools. And when the Board of Education came back and the DOE came back and said it was going to cost $100,000 per air conditioner, I was screaming to try to fix that. In fact, I did fix that later on when we were able to bring the cost down for $10,000. So sometimes you have to be that voice that goes against the grain and does things. When we did that work to the rural protest, the reason why is the governor had done 2 imposed contracts on teachers. And so I organized the teachers, I organized the community, and we went out and protested. And to what Representative Pierick said before, he's considered by both Republicans and Democrats to be the most extreme member. And when he says that he votes against the grain, he voted against things like health care for our kapuno, rental assistance for our kapuno. He voted against cancer research, suicide prevention. He voted against basic things such as making sure that kids who are on free and reduced lunch would have school buses. And it wasn't just the Democrats voting against him, it was his fellow Republicans that were voting against him. So when you're the only person in the legislature voting against things that are very basic, I find that to be extreme.
I'd like to come back to that question. Hawaii has had over 60 years of terrible governance, and I am grateful to have the largest no vote count out of any other legislator in our state. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak up for my constituents who I don't think have had an accurate voice in many years.
Sticking with this topic of civic discourse, Corey, when you were HSTA president, former school superintendent Christine Kishimoto, your 2 organizations had a bit of a contentious relationship in the last days of her administration. Some might argue that the union's criticism played a role in her departure, and a lot of that criticism played out on social media by many of your members. What are your thoughts on that?
There was a lot of things that happened there. In the beginning, we actually had a very good relationship. And then one of the things that we were working on was that thing about trying to improve teacher salaries. We had an agreement on that one, and basically that was reneged upon. And I felt like someone that is a superintendent needs to keep their word. When you make a promise, you need to keep that promise, and that was not occurred. And so there were many times where I felt like she didn't reach out to the teachers. She didn't ask for their opinion, and we just imposed things on them. And so one of the things that very important as a legislator is, you've got to go out into your community. You've got to listen to people. And as a superintendent, it's very important that she went out and listened to us. And we did. We went out and talked to teachers about things that needed to improve. And when you just shut that down, then you need to advocate for your teachers as best as can. One of the things I personally try to do in my leadership style is I believe the best way to get things done is to work with people. You got to create collaboration, especially at the legislature. If you're the lone no vote on so many of these issues, how are you making sure that you're working with the other side to get bills across? And so I think that it's important that you try to work with people as best as you can to get things done. And if not, then sometimes you need to have that voice and to make that change if possible.
Well, for you, Rep. Pierick, last year you posted a video on social media after seeing a pride flag at Eva Mackay Middle School. You questioned if, quote, these are the kinds of concepts and lifestyles we want to be conveying to our middle school students, end quote. Earlier this year, you posted a video of Rep. Janae Capella's floor speech in which she said she wanted to see a lesbian for president or a gay man for vice president. You asked your followers, quote, is this who you want for president? Rep. Capella has said that she has had violent threats against her office after you posted that. 2 questions for you. In posting these videos, do you intend to elicit a certain reaction from your viewers, and do you feel responsible for your followers' response?
Thank you, Blaze, for the question. So let's take those in 2 parts. So with the LGBTQ flag at Eva Mackay Middle School, let's rewind the clock and how that came about. So I was at the Lincoln Day celebration at Eva Elementary School, and I met the complex area superintendent for these schools, and they offered to meet with me. I met with them, and they asked, what can I do for you? And I said, I'd love a tour of all of our schools. So I took a tour of all of our schools, and my chief of staff, who's actually coincidentally here today, he and I would take pictures of all the schools we would visit, and we'd post videos of what we'd encounter to share with the community what's going on in our schools. And one of the schools was Eva Mackay Middle School, of all the schools we went to. And this school in particular had many LGBTQ flags posted outside of the door frames of many of the classrooms and rooms. And so after the tour was done, I asked the principal, can I talk with you for a minute? She said, yeah. I said, so what do these flags represent to you? And she said, they represent inclusivity and a safe space. And I said, well, they also represent the acronym LGBTQ, which is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, etc. And I said, are these the kinds of lifestyles and decisions we want to be promoting to our kids every single day, Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, outside all of the classrooms, all year round for our students? And she said, well, they also encompass the ideas of inclusivity and a safe space. Well, why not just have the words safe space and inclusivity versus the word transgender outside of most of the classrooms? Because transgenderism is changing your gender, sex change surgery. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. You can get prescribed gender dysphoria, and that can ensure the funding from the insurance companies to help for a male, a penis getting chopped off and replaced with a vagina. Do we want these concepts in front of our children every day of the week, all year round? And she said, well, you know what, let's make this a community conversation. And so she gave me 3 of her business cards with her phone number and email. Blake and I, with our media team, made a video. We posted it. And I'm grateful for the coverage and the discussion that the video created, because the teachers need to know that what they're doing has an effect on the kids, and the parents need to know that what's going on in the classrooms. So I'm very grateful for an open door to come into our schools as an elected official, elected by the people, to bring transparency in our government. Let's talk about the invocation, which is a prayer that Representative Janae Capella of the Big Island gave at the Capitol. She gave a big speech, like over 3 minutes long or so. And she talked about she wanted somebody who's a prostitute, who's a player, who has AIDS, who's a member of the LGBT community, all these things to be president. And I simply reposted her public video from the chamber floor onto my social media and asked the question, is this who we want to be president? And so now we're going back to the original question, do I have ownership of the responses on social media? Absolutely not. If I give a speech right here in this room and you all go make decisions after this meeting, those are your decisions, because we are America and we have independence. You're responsible for your decisions, you're responsible for my decisions, and I'm responsible for what I say. I'm not responsible for how you react to what I say.
Blaze, may I respond?
Briefly.
Okay, so first of all, with Representative Capella, one of the people that posted suggested violence, and you liked that post. Second of all, with Evan Mackay, when you went there, okay, these are our kids. I mean, what do you think they feel when you go out there and suggest whether this is the lifestyle and criticize them? In my classroom, I want to make sure all of our kids feel safe. I mean, I have gay kids in my classroom, and the one thing I would want to make sure is that all feel safe and none of them are bullied. You're a state representative. And so the idea is empathy is what I teach in my classroom. That's what I want for our community. When you went to Evan Mackay, did you see whether there was enough teachers or classrooms were crowded or whether they had enough staff? You spend your energy on the pride flag. If I was elected, I want to make sure that our kids have teachers and quality. And by the way, if putting up a flag in the room is going to turn someone gay, I've got signs in my classroom say, do your homework, and that doesn't work. So the idea is that just having that flag is only to say to those kids that this is a safe space for you. And I think for all of our kids, that's what we want.
So sticking with you, Corey, this audience question is for you. There's the feeling out there that the HSTA under your leadership played a key role in keeping students at home during the COVID pandemic that, you know, obviously, as we're seeing now, has contributed to learning loss. This person wants to know, why should you be a rep for us now?
First of all, I'm very proud that during the COVID crisis, not one of our students passed away, not one of our teachers passed away, and other states could not say that. The most important thing we wanted was safety and to protect our keiki. When I became president of HSTA, I went around and visited all of our schools. And when I talked to teachers, we put together a plan called The Schools Our Keiki Deserve. It was student-focused. And so I'm very proud of keeping things safe. We would have been happy to have accommodations for the parents that want to stay home, for the parents that want to send their kids to school, but the DOE would not make that choice. They did not want to work with us to have separate accommodations. One of the things that was very important during this time is that over 40% of our teachers had underlying health conditions that would put them in jeopardy. And we said, look, if you make accommodations for these teachers that have underlying health conditions so they don't have to expose themselves, we'll work with you to find ways that we can have classrooms on campus. And the DOE said, no, it's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And to protect our keiki and our teachers, the only way to do that was to make sure that we stayed online.
This other audience question is for you, Rep. Pierick. Do you support the separation of church and state?
Great question. Thank you, Blaise. So, what does the First Amendment says? It says basically that Congress shall respect no law establishing the religion thereof, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That is the First Amendment. Now, what about the phrase separation of church and state? Where does that come from? The third president of our union, Thomas Jefferson, in 1802, wrote a response letter to a Danbury Baptist pastor, basically saying that you don't have to worry that there's not going to be one religion or one Protestant denomination favored over another Protestant denomination, but there is a wall of separation between church and state. So that's the context of that phrase, separation of church and state. It's basically honing in on one Protestant denomination isn't going to become favored over another. Now, let's go further into the authorial intent behind the author. The very second day after he wrote that letter to the Danbury Baptist, where did he go? He went to the House of Representatives church service. He went into a government building into a church service, and he's the author of the phrase separation of church and state. He's talking about the Establishment Clause of, don't worry, we're not going to favor one over the other. So that's what that phrase means. And your question is, do I support separation of church and state? Absolutely, based on the authorial intent of our third president, Thomas Jefferson. Now we focus on the First Amendment. Do I support the Establishment Clause? Absolutely. I don't think that Buddhism should be the state religion of Hawaii or the country. I don't believe that Protestantism should be either. How about the free exercise thereof, or the Free Practice Clause? Absolutely. Everybody in this audience is free to practice their religion. Everybody in this panel is free to exercise their religion. And this First Amendment right extends to government officials as well. In government, we can have prayer meetings. We can pray, whether it's to Allah or Jesus. We have the freedom to pray, and I encourage our constituents to pray.
This next question is to both of you. Same question. I'll start with you, Corey. You both taught in different capacities. Corey as a DOE teacher, Elijah, you're a counselor and worked with some of the youth challenge kids. What do you teach your students about civil discourse and engagement?
So, first of all, I've been a history teacher for 25 years. And one of the things that I try to teach my students is to get involved with the political process. In my class, I have them debate the issues. Every single year, I have them do an activism project to pick a topic of their choice and to learn how to advocate for it. And they've done great things at my school. They've been able to advocate to make sure that lunches were not just at the cafeteria, but around the campuses so more kids could eat. They try to fight for more parking and just trying to make sure that there's, they love no homework every single year, but that one doesn't pass. But the idea is, what I try to teach them is, instead of trying to find an issue that's important to them, I want to get them involved with the political process. I get them to register to vote, I get them to learn the issues, and I get them to learn how to be part of government.
For you, Elijah.
Thank you, Blaise. So the question is, how do I promote civil engagement amongst students? So I absolutely prefer and desire that preschool students all the way up to college and active citizens are engaged in the legislature. So please submit testimony to your legislator. Just go to capital.hawaii.gov, become a member, and then you can submit testimony to our bills. And that doesn't have to stop at just the adulthood. You can do that as a child, whether you're in college or high school, etc. So everybody, please go to capital.hawaii.gov and become involved in the testimony process.
I'm also just curious, you're both, in a sense, teachers in different capacities, though. What have you learned from your students?
It is truly a privilege to have been a teacher for 25 years. In fact, I've probably taught thousands of kids. Many of them are living in our community. I think I became a teacher. The same reason I'm running for the legislature. I believe in equality and opportunity. I don't want any child that's in my classroom to feel bullied, for any of them to feel that they're unequal. I want them to all feel that they have a chance to improve their lives. This is why so many of the things I advocate for are part of my policy. I support things like a family leave program, child care tax credits, universal preschool. I want to make sure that we have good K through 12 public schools. I actually want to make community college free. And the reason why is, I believe every single one of those steps along a childhood's paradigm is going to give them that opportunity to have a good life. So I teach seniors. A lot of them are terrified of the next step of life. They're graduating and they don't know what to do next. And every year I ask them this question, how many are going to go to college? Maybe 40, 50% raise their hands. And then I said, how many of you would go to community college if it was free? And almost every single hand raises. A lot of my students can't afford the next step. And I know that there's so many things that community colleges can do, whether it's career and technical education, different programs to try to help them. So I think that from my students, I often learn about the very basics of policies that we need to improve their lives in our community.
The question is, what have I learned from my students?
Yeah.
I've learned that it's a good idea to listen to other people and what they have to say about their policies and issues. So different students of mine have come from different political backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, different genders, economic status, etc. And it's a good idea to listen to what they have to say when it comes to where they're coming from, why they believe what they believe.
This next set of questions is on taxes, and Rep. Pierick, I'm going to stick with you. You propose reducing income tax as well as the corporate tax and having the State Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism study a possible retail sales tax. Could you just talk a little bit more about what exactly your tax vision is and how these all work together?
Thank you. So Hawaii has about 1.4 million residents, and we have sometimes 11 million tourists every year. So that's like 10 times our state population comes to us in tourists. Florida has about 22 million residents and over 30 million tourists. So more of their state population is visited to them by tourists. And they don't have a state income tax. They don't have a general excise tax. They have a sales tax. And where do those sales come from? Mostly in Orlando, and like 30 million tourists making purchases, and then sales tax fuels their state budget. What if Hawaii had a similar model, where our residents didn't have to pay state income tax? I probably am like in the 30% tax bracket. We have other people here who pay a lot of money in state income tax and also in general purchases with general excise tax. If we just condense general excise tax to a sales tax and eliminate our state income tax and switch to a sales tax like Florida, we can have potentially a bigger state budget and definitely more income for our residents.
Corey, you want to see an expanded child tax credit. You're also calling for universal preschool and free community college. How is the state going to pay for all that?
Okay, so first let me respond to what he said. By getting rid of the income tax and corporate tax and all these taxes and raising the sales tax, I'm so curious to know what our sales tax would be in Hawaii to do that one. Are we looking at 20% in order to pay for things? Second of all, a sales tax is horribly regressive. It would hit our families when trying to buy milk or eggs or anything else when trying to do this one, and it hits poor families more than rich families. We already have a tax system in Hawaii that's regressive. The bottom 20% of income earners pays 50% more as a percentage of their taxes than the top 1%. So we have great inequality. So let me answer your question. If we just made the percentage of taxation equal for the top 1% as the bottom 20%, we have more than enough funding to fund every single one of those programs I suggested. And one of the things I've worked on is how to make things cheaper. When I say the thing, how much would community college cost? People give these high numbers. But believe it or not, it would only cost, from the research I've done, and I spent a tremendous amount of time on this, was $15 to $20 million. Now, for that $15 to $20 million, how could we do it that way? Because so many of our students would actually qualify for federal aid, but because they don't even know that they could get it, they're not even applying. So if we made the process they get in and then help them get federal aid, we can make community college for so many of our students. And those same students, Hawaiian Airlines right now is suffering. They cannot find enough airplane mechanics. And at our schools, if we allow them to go to community college for 2 years and get those airplane mechanics, not only do we increase their income, we bring in more taxation throughout their lives.
Sticking with money and the economy, Rep. Pierick, when you campaigned in 2022, you said that Hawaii should bolster its tech industry and inter-island trade. But in the last 2 years, you haven't introduced any bills that directly address either of those issues. What would be some of the proposals you would put forward next session that could help boost our economy here?
Great question. One of the bad laws, or I should say House rules in the House of Representatives, is we're only limited to 20 bills basically on odd years and 10 bills on even years. So when I look at all of the issues facing our constituents, the top 20 facing our constituents, those are the bills that I introduced for those reasons. And then for the tech industry bill, I voted yes on other members' bills that would provide tax credits for them. And then what can I do in 2025? Continue to vote yes on those bills and co-author those bills amongst other legislators as well.
What are some specific proposals you'd put forward regarding the economy?
For the film industry, you could say there's no taxes for them. For the tech industry, you could say for the first 10 years or 5 years that they're started, there's no corporate income tax for them.
For Corey, on your Civil Beat Q&A or on the question of economy, you pointed to bolstering the educational system, to prop up the economy, educate people. Outside of the education proposals, though, I'm curious, what would you put forward if you're elected that could create more of an economic drive here in the state?
Well, I believe education is one of the economic driving forces. If you look at one of the models I like to look at is Singapore. Small island, similar to Hawaii, not many natural resources. The one thing that they decided to do was to invest in their people. When you look at new industry, new businesses, that's coming from innovation. There's nothing to suggest that people in Hawaii can't be innovative to start their own businesses and start their own companies. But oftentimes when people in Hawaii, if they don't have that education or they have to leave away, then they don't have that chance to come back to Hawaii and produce those things. So the idea is that education can be an economic driving force. So that's something that I do encourage. And one of the things I keep on hearing from Elijah, he keeps on talking about these tax cuts and getting rid of the corporate tax and the income tax. And I saw him in the Civil Beat talking about the $17 billion and the 1.4 million residents. I think that you mentioned that earlier. And he never talks about the cuts that are going to happen because of this. First of all, our operating budget is about $9 billion. I mean, the biggest expenditures in the state are education and healthcare for our kupuna. And so when he talks about these tax cuts, I often wonder, what are we cutting? Schools for our keiki or healthcare for our kupuna? We have $2 billion for transportation for our roads. Are we not paying for our roads? We have $1 billion for pensions. Are we not going to pay for our pensions? That will not go over well in our community. When we talk about government and funding, it's easy to just say, let's have a tax cut here or a tax cut there. But without saying the consequences that's going to have for our society, the impact it's going to have on our senior citizens or our children. It's just easy to cut things, but we also have to find how are we going to fund these things to make sure that we have these programs.
Can I respond to that?
Sure, briefly.
Thank you. So where do we need tax cuts? Let's start with the rail. Billions and billions of dollars of your state income tax and your property tax going to what? A rail that goes from desert land in Kapolei to a place that nobody boards and gets off of at the stadium. How many billions of dollars of your property taxes is that going to? How about let's instead pay the firemen? Let's pay the police officers with your property taxes. Let's talk about another issue that we can cut taxes on. In the stadium, over $400 million on what? A big park so that people can play baseball? How about let's work on groceries? Let's work on housing. Let's work on homelessness. These are two big items that we can cut taxes on. And let's visit states like New Hampshire. Their state population is basically identical to Hawaii, and their budget is only like $7 billion a year. We have the same state population, but our budget is $17 billion a year. Their housing is cheaper. They have less homeless. They have less electricity costs. Okay, so we don't need to have a $17 billion budget with the governor getting paid $200,000 a year, the lieutenant governor getting paid $200,000 a year, the legislator, I get paid $74,000 a year, of which I voted no against my salary. Let's start with a tax cut there. Let's talk about the Board of Education superintendent. He gets over $200,000 a year, yet we have an 80% graduation rate at Campbell High School and Waipahu High School. So that means 20% of our students aren't even graduating, and the $10,000 per student that's going to them goes towards not graduating. There are so many areas we can cut taxes, and we don't need to worry about the dent it's going to make in our budget.
So, okay, sounds good, but that's actually not practical. In fact, if we do what your proposal is for rail, okay, it would actually cost us more money. You've said just end rail now. We have billions of dollars of contracts that if the state ended right now and the counties ended right now, we would get sued and have to pay more billions of dollars more for that. It would be a hurt to our economy because you have thousands of workers on it. So when you just talk about getting rid of rail, not only is that not practical, but as a legislative leader, you have to look at the consequences for our actions. You talk about all the $17 billion, most of that, you have money coming from the federal government for Medicare. Are you going to cut Medicare? Are you going to cut services for our kids? I mean, It's easy to look at one program over here and look at one salary and think if you just cut the superintendent's salary from $300,000 to $200,000, you can find $1 billion to pay teachers, firefighters, and nurses more. As elected leaders, we can't just have rhetoric. You got to go look into the numbers and see what the consequences for are. It's not just about $10 here or there, but the programs that we spend for people have an impact on our community. And that's why I mentioned pensions, healthcare, education, making sure that our kids that are hungry have something to eat, to make sure that we have funding for our homeless.
We're going to move on to agriculture, and I had a question about the seed companies because your guys' district includes a lot of the farmland in Kunia, a lot of the prime ag land here. The seed industry in Hawaii is in a steady state of decline. Out-of-state shipments of seed during the most recent growth season were 2.4 million pounds, down from 4.5 million pounds 5 years ago. The harvested acres are also down from 5 years ago. What should the state be doing with its ag lands that are currently leased by the seed companies?
You're talking about state-owned land, not privately owned land.
Yes.
It could offer up farmer programs where the farmers could come and use the land for free to develop agriculture and sell the products. When it comes to private agricultural land, there's a ton of red tape on how to go into your property, plant the seed, export it, sell it, and that's really cumbersome for farmers to make a profit. It's really unprofitable to have an agricultural business out here, and so it's just cheaper to buy bananas from Ecuador versus bananas in Waipahu.
So I totally support more local farming. Not only is it good for trying to make sure that we help our business in Hawaii, but again, when we don't have to ship things in, not only does it lower costs, but deals with problems such as climate change. One of the things that I strongly advocated for when I was HSA president, though, is that we have to be very careful that when we have agricultural land next to communities that live there, that can be very dangerous, especially for pesticide use. So I'm going to give you an example right now that's happening in our own community. Royal Kunia 2 is trying to build homes on former agricultural land. And one of the things I've had to advocate for as an EVA neighborhood board member is when I was walking in our community in Royal Kunia, one of my community members shared with me the story that there is a sign that says dioxin. And they're trying to put homes on a former dioxin site. And the big question is, and I've challenged the builders on this, is that have they done a health study to see the impact of this? So we always have to find the balance of trying to produce local food, but at the same time, we have to do it in a way that's safe for our communities.
Another question related to agriculture. The Agribusiness Development Corporation also has some lands in Kunia. It's long been criticized for not utilizing some of those former ag land, some of those former plantation lands quickly enough. What changes should the legislature make to the ADC?
Well, the ADC is getting all this money. And again, one of the things that was so important as legislators is not just the funding of products, but making sure that when we fund things, it's held accountable. And the ADC is a perfect example of that. If we're going to fund programs to try to produce more local farming, and this money is not being spent well, we have to be able to hold hearings and hold people accountable to make sure that if we're budgeting money, that money is actually doing the purpose that it has. And one of the things I did when I was HSA president is every single dollar that's spent, if it's not spent well, that means that there's $1 less for programs that are needed. And so it's really important that we dig deep into the numbers, do our research, so that government agencies are held accountable.
Is the question, what is the Agribusiness Development Corporation responsible for? And if it's not meeting those marks, what should we do?
Yeah, what sort of reform proposals would you have for the ADC?
I would say let's delete the program. We have so many programs in our government that are wasteful, that are consuming your tax dollars, and are basically being flushed down the toilet with outcomes that aren't being met. So let's just delete the program.
And then I have a bunch of questions on reform measures. So 2 years ago, the Foley Commission convened after bribery charges against 2 former lawmakers came to light. Many of the commission's most meaningful corrective measures have yet to be adopted. For both of you, what reform measures do you support, and what would you do as a representative to help get them passed?
Okay, so one of the underlying philosophies I have when it comes to government is we need to get money out of the process of how we elect our leaders. And so I fully support a public funding system, financing for campaigns. And the reason why I do this is you look at the Ty Collins scandal. You know, the same person that bribed Ty Cullen also gave legal contributions to many of our elected leaders. That's all perfectly legal. And so the idea is that if you can take money out of the system, there was a great Princeton study that was done. And the Princeton study showed that only about 30% of what people want gets passed by the legislature. This is federally. But when it comes to big business and money interests, it can be 60, 70%. And it shows that oftentimes when money is involved with the system, you have this corrupting effect among leaders, whether it can be as horrible as a bribe for an elected leader, but it could also be, you know, if you vote this way, I'll give a contribution to your campaign. So if we really wanted to make politics about the people and their wishes, then the best thing we can do is to make sure that when a politician is voting in for an issue, it's doing it because what their community wants rather than a single interest group is trying to do.
So the question is, what can we do to reform our government? 3 things: term limits, second, end exorbitant retirement systems for legislators, and 3, voting against our salary. So let's talk about term limits. I introduced a term limits bill in 2023. I co-introduced a bill in 2024 to promote term limits, and that basically means you can't be a legislator for 30 years, for 20 years, however long. It has to stop at a certain point. Right now, elected leaders, they get elected as legislators, and they stay in for a very long time because it's very easy for name-recognized people to get reelected versus the best candidate for the job getting elected because the community is actively engaged in the process of who they should vote for. So we should have term limits. A second, ending exorbitant retirement systems for legislators. I'm a legislator. If I just get elected 4 more times, I can retire with a life pension for just serving 10 years. That's silly. Teachers have to, I believe, serve for like 20 years before they can get retirement. There should 5 years? Okay. So I don't think legislators should have to only work for 10 years before they can get retirement. There should be like a 20-year system for all employees of the government. And the last is voting against our salary. We should only get paid until we start solving the issues in our state. Did you have to sit in traffic to get here? Did you see somebody homeless on the drive to get here? What about your rent right now? How much does that cost? What about when you go to Walmart? How much does a gallon of milk cost? When all those prices and times start decreasing, then we should start getting paid. So those are some reforms that I would promote.
Often, Hawaii officials fail to learn from tragedies, disasters, and scandals that occur here. What should the legislature be doing to make sure that there's more meaningful follow-up after certain critical incidences happen and that recommendations that follow are actually enacted?
So the concept of aloha in our state is beautiful. It basically means like, you know, grace and embrace and inclusivity, and that's wonderful. And the grace part is absolutely necessary. We also need a truth dynamic that comes with aloha. That means if the speed limit is 35 and you're driving too fast, yes, the police officer should give you aloha while he's talking to you about your speeding, but there also should be justice, and there should be a speeding ticket if you're driving too fast. What about the Lahaina fire? What about bribery cases? What about all of these imperfections in our elected leaders and such? There needs to be aloha in the addressing of them with justice, with truth. And that looks like consequences, jail time, fines, and being expelled from office.
Corey?
One of the things that's so important for government is not just to be reactive, it's to be proactive. We have to not just think about the problems that happened in the past, it's how we can prevent them in the future. And so like, you look at some of the things I want to propose. Let's take something really dramatic, climate change. We have to look at what future technology can happen. One of the things I'm really excited about, right where we are right now, is a new solar plant using batteries in order to help deal with climate change. In Kapolei, they're building a huge one that they've finished over there that's going to deal with this one. And I know that solar panels are getting cheaper and more efficient, and batteries are getting cheaper and more efficient. And so I don't want to wait to something like the Maui wildfires to occur before we take action to try to prevent a major problem. And so I think that it's incumbent upon legislative leaders to not just look at the past and look at how we can be reactive things, but what are the things that we see coming in the future that we need to take action now so that they do not occur?
For both of you, what are things you think the legislature should be doing to be more transparent?
So for the transparency, I think one of the problems we have right now with legislative hearings is that you can hold hearings and nearly have 48 hours before you actually have a hearing. And testimony sometimes can be right before the hearing, so people don't have a chance to actually see what other people are going to say and have a chance to respond. So first of all, what we need to do is have announcements for hearings a week in advance. And all testimony should be revealed about 2 days in advance so we have a chance to be more transparent. There's one thing that happened during COVID that I think was a really great change, and that was allowing testimony by Zoom. That means that more people that cannot travel to the Capitol can be part of the process. That means people on the neighbor islands can be part of the process. So that's one thing that's really improved when it comes to transparency. I'd also like to make sure that non-fiscal bills don't only go through the financial chair. You know, I was frustrated. I had a great community college bill that I was working on with legislators that would have just created a committee to look at the feasibility of free community college. And it was referred to the finance chair, and it was killed without a hearing. And I'm asking myself, this doesn't have any financial cost to it. Why is it going to the financial chair? And I think that that's a process of a way of killing bills, and it should not be up to one person to decide whether bills get passed or not.
Elijah, you've been in the building 2 years. What are things that the legislature should do to be more transparent?
Great question, Blaze. 3 things. Let's give every bill a hearing. Let's give more response time for committee hearings for bills. And let's let the decision-making process of bills be made public. So let's start with every bill gets a hearing. About 3,000 bills are introduced every year in the legislature, and probably over 800 get a hearing. That means there's like 2,000 or so bills, give or take, that aren't getting a hearing. That means people like me who knock on 8,000 doors and they hear from thousands of community members and they draft 20 bills, and then they give those bills to the legislator. Based on vendettas, different committee chairs won't give those bills a hearing. That's not right. So I introduced a bill in 2024, and that bill didn't even get heard to mandate that all bills get heard. And the next one is there should be more response time, just like Corey mentioned, for bills to get a hearing. Right now it's 48 hours. Let's bump it up to 3 days. So when the committee chair says, we're going to talk about housing, then the next committee hearing date, that date needs to be 3 days in advance to give the community a response time to educate themselves on what that bill is and then submit sufficient testimony on that bill. Thirdly, there needs to be decision-making made public. Right now, for several committees, the chair decides to hear all the bills. Somebody comes in the middle and says, I'd like to say yes or no on this bill. It's a bad bill. It's a great bill. The committee members listen to the ideas, they ask the questions of the testifiers, and then they recess, the gavel out, the Zoom cameras get turned off, and they go into a private room and talk about why they're going to vote yes or no. And I've heard reasons like, well, I'm going to vote yes because this is the finance chair's bill, and I want to make sure my bills get passed by the finance chair because I have to do a quid pro quo on that. That's ridiculous. Another person said, well, so-and-so introduced the bill, and they're my friends, so I'm going to vote yes on the bill. Or I'm going to vote yes on this bill because the majority caucus thinks it looks bad on us if we vote no. Okay, our state is the way it is because the legislators are acting the way they are. And so decisions need to be made public and not made private.
What are both of your thoughts on having a year-round legislative session?
I would support it if there's a couple of things that have to happen. Number one, I do not like the idea that legislators have jobs outside the legislature, and I'll tell you why. Oftentimes, if you're working for a company that's paying you $200,000 a year to work part-time, the question is then who's your allegiance to? So, I mean, having something like the city council where they meet once in a while would give an opportunity for more discussion on bills for a greater time period. And right now, there are times where there are huge decisions that are made in such compressed timeframes that doesn't even give experts and the community a time to reflect and to ask whether this is a good bill for our society. So I'd like to see it would be a good idea to extend it year round, to break up so there's more time for committees to hear and make sure that there's more testimony that's allowed for the public as well.
So the question is, should the legislator be part-time 4 months or full-time year-round? I don't think it makes a difference, really. If you've got legislators with bad ideas part-time, they're going to have bad ideas full-time. If you've got staff members that don't know how to process a bill within a short amount of time, if you give more time, it might help. But there's a lot of really good qualified people out there that you can hire, and I'm grateful that I had them on my staff that can process a lot of bills in a short amount of time. So I don't think time is the issue. It's a personnel problem.
Final question for both of you. There's no clearly defined day-to-day tasks for a state lawmaker. The job is really what you make of it. If whoever gets elected, how do you plan on spending your time day to day?
So we do have a job description. It's in our state constitution, Article 3. We're supposed to introduce the bills. We have impeachment power of voting and things like that. And then there's so many basically cultural norms or expectations that are upon us, like go to community events, attend meetings, ask people questions, introduce yourself to people and just say, hey, how are you doing? What's your name? What can I do for you? Invite people by phone to come. And so there's a lot we can do, and I plan on to continue doing the next 2 years if I get reelected, and that's be involved in the community, send out mailers, send out emails, be active on social media, go to community events, and be a member of the community and represent them.
There's many jobs. I think one is, I learned this when I was HTA president, is people want to see someone that will fight for them. In our community, you may not be able to solve every single problem, but you want to be that liaison between government and your neighbors. And at the end of the day, someone wants to see that someone's going to be out there trying to help them solve their problems. I also think it's very important to be a leader. And what it means to be a leader is what's going to help our community? How are you going to help the diverse members of our community improve their lives? And you've got to go out there on a day-by-day basis. Even though the legislature is part-time, the work cannot be part-time. During the session, you may have to be able to vote on bills and stuff like this, but the rest of the year, how are you representing your community? How are you researching bills? I know that before, if you walked into my office, you would see binders on every single topic with tons of research, because I knew that if you wanted to get good legislation passed, you better do your research, you better go out and talk to the community, and that's how you get things done.
Great. Well, Corey Rosenlee, Elijah Pierick, thank you so much for joining us today at our candidate forum. Why don't you give your candidates a round of applause, folks?